After hearing horror stories of early access games a couple years ago, I decided that I would never buy an early access game. But it eventually changed, and I've now played several games in early access with varying degrees of enjoyment. So let's talk about what early access is, which if you know, feel free to skip that part, what games I've enjoyed or not enjoyed in early access, and what I look for when I consider buying a game in early access more generally. So what is early access? If you follow indie games, or maybe even if you don't, you've probably heard of early access, and it's been growing in popularity in the recent years. In early access, you're paying for a game, usually at a discounted price, in order to get early access to the game, aka in order to play the game quicker. In return, the game is unfinished, so you're playing an incomplete and usually buggy product. If this sounds similar to game betas or alphas, that's because it is. However, early access tends to be more uniform and standardized. With early access, you're paying for the game, and you'll get the full game on release, in addition to being able to play it now. Betas, on the other hand, definitely have a lot more variance across different games. Some games will require pre-orders, some will give out beta keys in a lottery system, and others will give out keys to select people. So for example, if it's a beta for a game sequel, they might give beta access to streamers or content creators of the first game. This is just to say that early access tends to be more standardized than betas or alphas in regards to payment structure and game access. With early access, you own the game, but that's not guaranteed for betas. So why do so many developers turn to early access? Well, in theory, it's great for both the developers and the players, and they should both benefit from it. The developers get money quicker, so they can actually fund the game, they can actually create it, which is especially important for small and indie studios that don't have that same access to funding as some AAA studios. And in return, players can play the game earlier, and they can take an active role in the development of the game by giving feedback, suggestions, and reporting bugs. But if you're familiar with early access, you'll know that it doesn't always quite work out like that, and you've probably heard some early access horror stories. Once they've sold you the game, they can do whatever they want with it, whether that means never updating the game again, taking 10 years to fully release it, or supposedly finishing and releasing the game in an incomplete and buggy state. All of these are especially likely if the game developers don't get enough cash flow, but there are also cases of developers intentionally overpromising features and game mechanics they never actually tend to put in order to sell the game more, in order to make more money. So for example, you have games like DayZ that started early access as a buggy mess and took 5 years until it was the full release. As another example, the infamous Star Citizen was supposed to be completed in 2014, but it's still not complete with no full release date on the horizon. At this point, I'm honestly not sure if it will ever get released, but I guess time will tell. This game seems especially scammy, given that you can spend hundreds of dollars on ships and other in-game items, and there's no full release in sight. And in fact, the most expensive ship you can buy for this incomplete, this unfinished game is over $1,000 for that ship alone. So these early access stories and countless others made me cautious of early access games as a whole, but I do still think that it can work in some instances, depending on the developer and type of game involved. Most of the games that I've played in early access have been roguelites, partially because I like roguelites in general, but I do also think that roguelites might be uniquely suited for success in early access. That's because even when you play a completed roguelite, you will slowly uncover more mechanics, features, and progression as you complete more and more runs. Because roguelites naturally have this unveiling of mechanics and progression as you play through them, adding more features, characters, etc. into the game over time, over the course of development, feels more natural. It feels more like you're playing a roguelite that isn't in early access. And you also don't have to restart a 20-hour game to experience these changes. You can just go on more runs, which you would do anyways if you were just playing the roguelite as it is. More specifically, I got Hades, Slay the Spire, and Griftlands in early access, as well as a couple other smaller roguelites. I think Slay the Spire looked perfectly in early access, and it was the first ever early access game that I bought. I've also been playing Hades since over a year ago, and seeing them gradually add new bosses, areas, and weapons to the game was incredibly enjoyable, and I don't feel like my experience with the game was harmed at all by playing in early access, except perhaps by the story dragging on. I couldn't complete it obviously until the game was fully released. But probably the most popular and most successful example of an early access game is Minecraft. Now, it wasn't officially called early access, that wasn't really a term they used back then, but it followed the early access model. You bought the game to get early access to the alpha or beta, depending on when you bought it, and that purchase meant that you owned the game forever, even after the full release. Early adopters were able to give feedback to the game, and the game had frequent large updates, which of course still continue to this day, even years after the full release. So clearly there can be some huge success with the early access model, both for the players and developers involved. But early access isn't always perfect. The main game that I got in early access, where I didn't enjoy their early access part, was Surviving the Aftermath. My problem with Surviving the Aftermath wasn't that it was bad. I actually enjoyed the game as it was, but it definitely felt thin and lacking and unfinished. And that's because those were all true. You know, that's what early access is, right? It's an unfinished game. My problem with that is that for those type of games, survival, city builder games, I don't usually play a lot of rounds of them. I usually play one round, or if I really enjoy the game, I'll play a couple rounds, because a lot of the charm of those type of games for me comes from exploring the challenges, the technologies, the mechanics, seeing how things progress to the end. I don't want to start a new game with each update in order to see the new mechanics. And when I had to do that with Surviving the Aftermath, it felt a little boring and repetitive to repeat the start of the game because I'd already learned the core mechanics and a lot of the different random events that I would encounter. So while they've made some huge and impactful changes, especially in regards to the endgame, I don't really even want to get to them. So I decided that I won't touch that game again until the full release, when I can fully experience it, or at least experience the full base game, because there's almost definitely DLCs coming there. I was also a little annoyed by Grifflins during early access. That's because my save file stopped working between updates, so I had to restart all of my cross-game progression. This isn't an early access problem per se, but a lot of random problems like this can happen in early access, and these problems can be a good reason to wait for the full release. There's always a chance of losing progress or things breaking with later updates in early access games, even if it's unintentional. And outside of those games, there are many other games, some of which I mentioned earlier, that have had extremely long early access cycles that were never completed or released in an unfinished state, as it seems like Torchlight 3 was from the reviews that I've read. Which raises a question: what should you think about when you consider purchasing an early access game? Despite having bought and enjoyed several early access games, I'm still generally hesitant when I see a game in early access because of those previously mentioned risks. So I'd like to ask myself a couple of questions before I buy an early access game. First, will I get my money's worth, and will I enjoy the game as it is right now? So basically, if I feel confident that I will play this game enough and enjoy this game enough in its current state, it's not as important to me if the game runs into early access woes. If the game is never finished, or if the developers add some updates later that I don't like, that's okay, because I've already enjoyed the game, I've already got my money's worth. Second, will playing the unfinished game now ruin my experience later? As I mentioned earlier, I think there are some games that work well in early access because playing an incomplete product doesn't ruin the finished, completed product. For me, this has been true for roguelites, where I enjoyed completing runs both during and after early access. But it was not true for other games, such as Surviving the Aftermath, because that's a genre where I generally don't enjoy starting new games or new runs repeatedly. And I think that story-driven games are also games that I would tend to avoid in early access because I don't want the story spoiled and I don't want to repeat it. Obviously, everyone is different here, so it's something to think about for yourself. What type of games would I be okay experiencing part of it first and then the full game later? And third, do I trust this developer? For most of the early access games that I purchased, I'd already played games by those developers or knew that they were trustworthy. Basically, if it's an established, trusted developer, there's less of a risk of them taking your money and running, as has been seen on rare occasions by some smaller, newer game studios. I obviously don't mean to say that all new game developers are untrustworthy, that's just not true, but it is a risk that you're taking with early access. When I bought Hades in early access, for example, I didn't feel worried at all because I had played and enjoyed Supergiant's previous 3 games, so I knew that they would do well with Hades. Finally, there are a couple smaller questions I think are worth asking. Am I willing to wait for the full release? You know, how patient am I or how impatient am I to play this particular game? Does the cheaper early access price make it worth it? And do I want to be a part of this development? Do I want to give feedback to the developers as the game is being made? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on early access as well. Is it something that you usually avoid, or is early access not a problem to you? What games have you played in early access that have gone particularly well, but that have gone really poorly? Please like this video to help me out if you found it enjoyable or informative, and I'll link some more videos of mine in the description down below. Thanks for watching.